He looked at her with eyes darker than the night, and in a voice that could melt steel, he whispered, "Stay with me tonight." She should have walked away. She should have remembered her plan for revenge, but instead her heart betrayed her. She wasn't born into the world of blood and bullets. Once, her life was filled with laughter, light, and the warmth of family dinners that stretched late into the night. Her father used to tell her stories of courage and honor, of how doing the right thing always came before power. But those stories ended the night everything she loved was taken away. That night wasn't just a tragedy, it was the moment innocence died and a promise of vengeance was born. The fire that consumed her home still burns inside her, but now it takes the form of determination. Every sunrise reminds her of what she's lost, and every shadow whispers one name, the man she swore to destroy. She remembers the sound before the silence, the crash of doors, the echo of footsteps, the desperate cry of her mother. Then came the gunshots, sharp, final, merciless. She hid behind the curtains, trembling, her heart beating louder than her thoughts. When she dared to look, she saw the face of the man giving orders. The infamous Mafia Boss, ruthless and calm, his voice colder than the steel of his gun. That image carved itself into her memory, branding her soul with hatred. From that night on, she stopped being a daughter. She became a weapon forged by pain and grief. Revenge wasn't a choice. It was survival. Years passed, and she learned to wear masks as easily as she once wore innocence. She studied their world, the world of crime, power, and control. She learned the language of lies, the elegance of deception. Every smile she practiced was a blade hidden in velvet. Every gentle word she spoke carried venom. The girl who once feared the dark now walked through it like a queen. She knew she would face him again, and when she did, he wouldn't recognize her. He would see a woman, mysterious, confident, untouchable, but beneath that calm, her heart pulsed with fury. Every move she made was another step toward retribution, but fate, cruel as ever, didn't unfold as she expected. When she finally entered his world, she found something she hadn't anticipated: order, loyalty, even a strange sense of justice. The Mafia boss she had sworn to hate wasn't the monster she remembered from her nightmares. He was powerful, yes, but also wounded. His empire was built on loss, on sacrifices she couldn't yet understand. Rumors whispered that he too had been betrayed, that his hands were stained, but not with her father's blood. Still, she refused to believe it. The truth didn't matter. Her purpose was set. Her life belonged to vengeance, and she wouldn't let pity poison it. Yet every time their paths crossed, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. His voice, deep, commanding, and strangely gentle, stirred something she thought she'd buried long ago. The way he looked at her wasn't with arrogance, but recognition, as if he saw through her disguises straight into her fractured soul. And that terrified her, because hatred was simple. It gave her strength. But this confusion, this heartbeat she couldn't control, it made her weak. She tried to remind herself of her father's lifeless eyes, her mother's last scream, the smell of smoke and blood. But his presence kept haunting her, disarming her defenses piece by piece. Every time he said her name, her revenge felt like a chain she wanted to break. She spent sleepless nights staring at the city lights outside her window, torn between rage and something far more dangerous: curiosity. Who was this man really? Was he the same monster who had ordered her family's death, or was there more to the story she didn't yet know? The more she learned about him, the more tangled her emotions became. His enemies feared him, but his people loved him. He moved through life like a man burdened by ghosts, haunted by sins he could never confess. And though she told herself she wanted to destroy him, she couldn't deny that some part of her wanted to understand him first. Her revenge was supposed to bring peace, but instead, it awakened questions she had no answers for. Was she still the victim, or had she become something darker, someone capable of the very cruelty she hated? The line between justice and obsession blurred until she couldn't see where one ended and the other began. Every plan, every calculated move started to feel like fate's cruel joke. She came to destroy a man. But somewhere in the echoes of their encounters, she began to wonder if fate had brought her here not for vengeance, but for truth. A truth that could either set her free or destroy her completely. Her plan wasn't crafted overnight. It was the result of years spent in silence, watching, learning, waiting. Every scar in her heart became a strategy. Every tear shed in loneliness became a lesson. Revenge wasn't about fury. It was about patience. She knew rage could burn fast and die out, but deception could destroy from within. She studied the mafia's hierarchy like a surgeon studies anatomy, dissecting its power, its weaknesses, and above all its king. The boss, the man who once stood over her family's ruin. To reach him, she had to become something he couldn't resist. A mystery cloaked in grace and danger. Her first step was transformation. She abandoned her old identity like a discarded skin. A new name, a new face, a new life. The timid girl who once trembled at the sound of gunfire was gone. In her place stood a woman who could command a room with a single glance. She learned to walk in heels sharp enough to pierce egos, to speak in tones that could both charm and challenge. The world began to call her Elena Volkov, a name whispered with both admiration and fear in underground circles. It didn't take long for her reputation to reach the one man she wanted to notice her most. The boss. When their paths finally crossed, it wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. The gala was grand, filled with the city's elite. Men in tuxedos, women in diamonds, laughter drowning out secrets. She stood by the marble staircase, a vision in crimson. Her lips painted the color of vengeance, and when he appeared, time seemed to slow. The mafia boss, cold, unreadable, commanding, walked through the crowd as if the world itself parted for him. Their eyes met, and in that moment her plan began. She smiled, not the smile of affection but of control. He returned it with curiosity. To him, she was just another beautiful stranger. To her, he was already the prey. Over the next few weeks, she wove her web with the precision of an artist. A casual encounter here, a carefully timed rescue there. She let him see just enough vulnerability to intrigue him, just enough distance to chase her. Every move was calculated, every word rehearsed. But deception, she learned, is an art painted with emotion, and emotions are never fully predictable. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between manipulation and charm, she caught herself wondering who was truly in control. Him or her. It was dangerous thinking, but she brushed it aside. Love was an illusion she couldn't afford. She was here to destroy, not to feel. Still, he intrigued her in ways she couldn't explain. He wasn't the cruel tyrant her nightmares had built. He was guarded, yes, but also strangely gentle in his solitude. The way he observed people, the way he spoke when no one was listening, it revealed a man living under the weight of 1,000 regrets. Once, late at night, he told her about trust. In my world, he said quietly, trust is more dangerous than betrayal. She smiled faintly, hiding the ache in her chest, because she knew she was the very proof of that truth. She was the betrayal he didn't see coming. But deception is a double-edged blade. It cuts both ways. The deeper she went into his world, the more she saw the cracks beneath the empire. Men who whispered in fear, rivals waiting in the shadows, secrets buried in silence. She realized his kingdom wasn't built on cruelty. It was built on survival. And then came the discovery that shattered her certainty. Her father's death might not have been his doing after all. There were others, ruthless men who had manipulated everything from the shadows, using the boss as both weapon and shield. The revenge she'd built her life around began to tremble under the weight of doubt. She should have stopped then, should have turned away before her lies caught up with her, but she couldn't. The game had gone too far, and so had her heart. Each time he looked at her, she felt the walls she built begin to crumble. His trust, unearned yet unguarded, was her greatest weapon and somehow her greatest weakness. Nights turned into conversations and conversations into confessions. Somewhere between the lies she told and the truth she hid, something real began to bloom, a dangerous kind of affection neither of them could name. Yet every time she smiled at him, guilt burned in her throat like fire, because she knew what he didn't. She was the enemy at his table, the ghost of his past disguised as salvation. Her plan of deception was supposed to be perfect, emotionless, exact, but nothing about him fit into her script anymore. His warmth, his honesty, his unexpected vulnerability, they weren't part of the story she'd written, and so she began to lose control of her own narrative. Now, when she looked at him, she no longer saw the man she planned to destroy. She saw the man who had unknowingly taught her how to feel again, but she couldn't stop. She had gone too deep, too many lies, too many secrets. The plan had taken on a life of its own, and she was trapped in it. She'd wanted revenge to heal her scars, but now revenge was carving new ones in her soul. The deception that was supposed to break him was slowly breaking her instead. There was something unsettling about the way he carried silence. Most men in his world spoke with noise, orders, threats, the sound of control, but he didn't need to. His presence alone demanded attention. The first time she realized that, it sent a shiver down her spine. His calmness was more dangerous than rage. His stillness spoke of a power that didn't need to prove itself. She told herself it was all part of the actors. Observe him, study him, learn his weaknesses. But the longer she stayed in his orbit, the more she found herself drawn to the quiet fire behind his eyes. It wasn't weakness she saw there, it was pain, and that made him human, something she wasn't prepared to feel for him. Every meeting with him became a game of control, a battle of words hidden behind charm. He'd invite her for dinner, and she'd accept with a smirk, knowing every detail could be a weapon later. The restaurant would always be empty except for the two of them, candlelight flickering between shadows and secrets. He'd ask about her past, and she'd give him fragments wrapped in mystery. Some stories, she'd say softly, are better left untold. He'd smile at that, low, deliberate, as if he admired her restraint. In those moments, it was almost impossible to remember which one of them was playing the game better. And yet, it was his contradictions that fascinated her most. The Mafia Boss was ruthless by reputation, a man whose decisions could end lives without hesitation. But in private, there were glimpses of something fragile. An old photograph kept in his pocket, a worn ring he never removed. A moment when his hand lingered too long over hers before he caught himself. It was in those subtle cracks of his armor that she began to see the truth. He wasn't just dangerous because of his power. He was dangerous because he could make her forget why she hated him in the first place. His charm wasn't in his words, it was in his sincerity, his quiet, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. There were nights when she'd lie awake, her heart pounding with confusion. She'd replay every conversation, every glance, every near touch. The plan that once felt like destiny now felt like a lie she couldn't escape. He wasn't supposed to make her feel this way. He wasn't supposed to make her laugh or listen or care, but he did. The way he looked at her was different from any man she'd ever known. It wasn't lust, it wasn't conquest. It was recognition, like he saw through her lies and still chose to stay. That terrified her more than any threat ever could. Because beneath all her practiced deceit, she was beginning to want his trust, even though she knew she didn't deserve it. One evening, a storm raged outside his penthouse, thunder echoing against the glass. She was standing by the window, watching lightning split the sky when he approached her. "You don't fear storms," he murmured. "Most people flinch at the sound of thunder." She turned, meeting his gaze. "I've lived through worse," she said simply. For a moment neither spoke. The silence stretched, thick with something unspoken, something neither of them could admit. Then he took a step closer, too close, and the air changed. She could feel his breath against her skin, his presence wrapping around her like a promise and a warning. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered. The words weren't a command, they were a confession, and her heart betrayed her. She should have walked away. She should have remembered her purpose, her mission, her vengeance. But in that moment, revenge didn't matter. The storm outside became nothing compared to the one inside her. She looked at him, really looked, and saw a man who'd been broken long before she ever came into his life. A man who carried guilt like armor and loneliness like a curse. Against every instinct, against every reason, she stayed, and when he touched her, it wasn't the touch of a monster. It was the touch of someone who hadn't known warmth in years. That night didn't erase her pain, it only deepened it. Because she realized she wasn't pretending anymore. The lines between truth and lies had vanished. From that night on, she was caught in an emotional war she couldn't win. Every time she looked at him, her hatred whispered reminders of the past, but her heart fought back with memories of his gentleness. She began to see him in moments of vulnerability. The way he stared at the city lights when he thought no one was watching. The way he avoided questions about his own past. The quiet regret in his voice when he spoke of trust and betrayal. And suddenly, she wasn't sure who the real villain was anymore. The world had painted him as a monster, but maybe monsters were just broken souls shaped by pain. Maybe they weren't so different after all. Still, she couldn't forget why she was there. Love was never part of the plan. Every heartbeat she gave him felt like treason against her own past. Yet the dangerous charm he carried, his ability to be both ruthless and gentle, feared and fragile, pulled her deeper into the shadows of her own emotions. She had come to destroy him, but now she wasn't sure if she could survive without him. And as she stood beside him, watching the empire of crime and loyalty he'd built, one thought consumed her. If loving him was her downfall, then maybe vengeance had never been her destiny. Maybe he was. The night began like any other, too quiet to trust. The city outside his penthouse pulsed with life, but up here, the world felt distant, almost unreal. Rain streaked down the glass walls, thunder rumbling like a warning in the distance. She stood there, motionless, staring at her reflection, wondering how long she could keep living inside a lie. The truth was clawing at her chest, begging to be released, yet fear kept her silent. She had built her identity on vengeance, every lie a stone in the wall protecting her mission. But now with him that wall was cracking, and tonight it was going to shatter. He entered the room quietly, his presence filling the space before his voice did. "You've been distant," he said softly, a trace of pain hidden behind composure. She turned slowly, masking her turmoil behind a calm she no longer truly felt. "Maybe I'm just tired," she replied. But he wasn't fooled, he never was. His eyes, dark and unyielding, searched her face like they were reading the story she refused to tell. "You're lying," he murmured, stepping closer, "and I don't know if it's to protect me, or yourself." That was the danger with him. He didn't just listen to her words, he listened to her silences. The air between them felt heavy, charged with all the emotions they had tried to bury beneath desire and deceit. He stopped just inches from her, his gaze fierce, his tone low but trembling with something raw. "Who are you really, Elena?" The question hit her like a blade. For a moment, she wanted to keep lying to smile and play the role she had perfected, but her throat burned with the truth. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, the moment she would reveal who she was, the moment he would see her as the daughter of the man he'd destroyed. Yet now, standing before him, the certainty she'd clung to began to crumble. Because she didn't just want to destroy him anymore, she wanted him to understand her. She took a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "You once told me trust is more dangerous than betrayal. You were right." His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. "Because trust blinds us," he said quietly, "and betrayal opens our eyes." Her next words trembled with pain. "Then open your eyes, and see who I really am." The silence that followed was deafening. She stepped closer, tears threatening to spill. "You remember the night 12 years ago, the fire, the man who refused to give up his business to your empire, the man you had killed. He was my father." He froze. The world seemed to stop breathing with him. The only sound was the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the glass, echoing the heartbeat pounding in her chest. His eyes, once filled with warmth, turned cold, unreadable. He didn't speak, he didn't move. She wished he'd shouted, denied it, anything. But instead he looked at her like a man who had just seen a ghost. "You're lying," he finally said, though his voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "No, you killed him. You destroyed my family, and I came here to do the same to you." He took a step back, his composure unraveling. His hands trembled, not with anger, but with something far deeper, guilt. "I didn't kill your father," he said hoarsely. "I gave the order, but I was misled." She wanted to hate him for that, for making it sound like mercy, but something in his voice stopped her. It wasn't the tone of a man defending himself. It was the confession of someone who had been haunted by the same ghost she carried. "I thought he was the traitor," he continued, his voice breaking. "They told me he sold information to my enemies. I was wrong. God help me, I was wrong." Her breath hitched. The ground beneath her felt like it was disappearing. For years, she had built her life on hatred, a hatred that gave her purpose, that kept her alive. But now, standing before him, she realized that everything she believed in was tangled in lies. Her revenge, her pain, her entire identity, all of it had been orchestrated by someone else. "You destroyed my life," she whispered, voice trembling, "and I destroyed yours without even knowing it." He looked at her with tears glistening in his eyes, the kind of tears that didn't fall easily for men like him. "Maybe that's what we deserve," he said quietly, "to destroy each other, until there's nothing left." Lightning flashed outside, and for a brief moment, their faces were illuminated, two broken souls caught between love and ruin. She wanted to run, to scream, to hate him again, but she couldn't, not anymore. Because in that raw, fragile silence, she saw the truth. He wasn't her enemy. He was her reflection, wounded, haunted, and alone. He reached for her hand, hesitated, then let it fall. "Stay with me tonight," he whispered again, not as a plea, not as seduction, but as surrender. And though every reason in her mind screamed no, her heart, heavy with pain and longing, whispered yes. The night of confession wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, like a wound reopening. It was the night lies turned into truth, and hatred bled into love. It was the night they both realized that the past could not be changed. But maybe, just maybe, the future still could. The morning after her confession felt like waking up in a different world. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed on her chest. The air between them was no longer charged with desire or deception, it was suffocating with truth. She sat by the window, watching the sun fight its way through gray clouds, wondering how something so bright could still exist after so much darkness. Behind her, he stood by the fireplace, motionless. Neither had slept, neither had spoken. Everything that had once connected them, attraction, mystery, the illusion of control, was stripped bare. All that remained was the truth, and the damage it had done. He broke the silence first. "You think you know everything," he said, voice low, roughened by exhaustion, "but you don't." She turned to him, her eyes red from tears and rage. "Then tell me," she demanded. "Tell me what I don't know." He stared into the fire, the orange light flickering across the scars of a man who had lived too many lifetimes in one. "Your father was never my target. He was a casualty of someone else's game, someone who's been playing both of us for years." Her blood ran cold. "Who?" He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Victor Morty," he said finally. The name hit her like a slap. She had heard it before, whispered in the dark corners of her past, buried in rumors she thought were untrue. Victor, her father's so-called business partner, the man who had promised to protect their family when the mafia's shadow began to spread. "He set us both up," the boss continued. "He gave me false intel, told me your father was leaking information to my enemies. I believed him. I sent men that night. By the time I learned the truth, it was too late." Her knees weakened, her body trembling with realization. "So the man I came here to destroy," he met her gaze, his eyes filled with quiet torment, "was never your enemy." The words twisted the knife deeper. Everything she had lived for, every lie, Every calculated move was built on the wrong foundation. She wasn't avenging her father. She was destroying the one man who had unknowingly shared her pain. Anger erupted through her, sharp and cold. "You could have found out sooner," she hissed. "You could have stopped it." "I tried," he said, stepping forward. "But Morty controls everything, the police, the press, the families. He needed chaos, and he used us to create it. You were his weapon, and I was his mistake." His voice cracked at the end, and she saw it, the guilt he carried, the burden he never put into words. She wanted to hate him for it, to curse him for believing lies that cost her everything. But the hatred that once burned inside her now flickered weakly, replaced by something she didn't understand: sorrow. For him, for herself, for the years they both lost to manipulation. The realization hit her like thunder. "He's still alive, isn't he?" she asked. He nodded grimly. "Morty runs the docks now, controls most of the trade. He thinks you're still working for him, feeding me false leads." Her breath caught. "He used me, just like he used you." The boss stepped closer, his tone softening. "No, Elena, he used your pain. That's what monsters like him do. They don't destroy you with force. They do it with memory." Tears blurred her vision, but this time they weren't for her father. They were for herself, for the years she'd lived as someone else's pawn. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought revenge would set me free." He looked at her, his expression weary yet sincere. Revenge never frees anyone. It just replaces one prison with another. The room fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking deep into her heart. For the first time, she understood what he meant when he said trust was dangerous. She had trusted pain more than truth. She had let it guide her every move, every thought, every heartbeat. And now, with the truth laid bare, she felt hollow, like a soldier who realized the war she fought was never hers to begin with. But amid the sorrow, something else began to stir resolve. "If he's still out there," she said, wiping her tears, "we end this together." He studied her for a long moment. "You don't owe me this." "No," she said firmly, stepping closer, her voice steady. "But I owe myself the truth. My father deserves that much." He nodded slowly, almost reluctantly, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hope, fragile and dangerous." "Then we end it," he said quietly. "But understand this, Elena. Once we start, there's no going back. Morty won't stop until one of us is dead." Her lips trembled, but her resolve didn't. Then let him try. In that moment, the two of them, once enemies, now allies bound by pain, stood together not as lovers or rivals, but as survivors of the same cruel fate. The truth had destroyed the lies between them, but it had also built something stronger, a shared purpose. For the first time, she wasn't acting out of vengeance. She was fighting for something real: justice, redemption, maybe even peace. As the fire burned low and the storm outside began again, she realized something profound. The truth didn't heal her. It never could. But it gave her clarity, and clarity was more dangerous than revenge ever was. The night they decided to face Victor Morty, the air itself felt heavy with fate. The city was cloaked in fog, the streets slick with rain, and somewhere deep inside her, fear and resolve collided like thunder. She wasn't the same woman who had come here months ago. The girl driven by vengeance was gone. What remained was someone who had tasted truth bitter, raw, and unforgettable. Beside her stood the man she once swore to destroy, the man she had learned to understand, and the one she could no longer hate. The Mafia Boss, her enemy, her savior, her undoing. He adjusted his gloves, his expression unreadable, his eyes calm in a way that only men who have accepted death could be. "Once we start this," he said quietly, "there's no coming back." She nodded. "I already left everything behind." A pause. Then, softer, "Even your revenge." She met his gaze, especially that. They moved through the night like shadows, silent, purposeful. Every step brought her closer to the truth, to the man who had destroyed both their lives for power. The plan was simple: infiltrate Morty's compound, gather the evidence, and end his reign once and for all. But in her heart, she knew nothing about this night would be simple. It wasn't just a mission, it was a reckoning. For her father, for him, for everything stolen from them by lies. When they arrived, The compound loomed before them, cold steel gates, armed guards, and the kind of darkness that seemed alive. The boss, her boss, now gave a silent command, and his men moved like ghosts through the perimeter. She followed close, her heartbeat loud in her ears. As they slipped inside, memories came flooding back. Her father's voice, her mother's laughter, the smell of smoke. It was all leading here, to this place, to this moment, but fate, as always, had its own plans. The trap was already set. Morty had known. The alarms blared, lights flared on, and gunfire erupted like thunder. Chaos swallowed the night. She ducked behind a pillar, returning fire, her body trembling but focused. He fought beside her, precise, relentless, his every move a shield for her. Blood and noise and adrenaline merged into one blur of survival, and through it all, one thought consumed her: not this time. Not again. They made it to the inner chamber, where Morty waited calm, smiling, surrounded by men with guns. He looked older than she remembered, but the evil in his eyes was the same. Elena Volkov, he drawled. The daughter who never learned her place. And you. He sneered at the boss, the fool who thought he could rewrite history. History rewrites itself. The boss said coldly, "You just won't be in the next chapter." Morty laughed. "You both could have had everything: power, wealth, control. But you let sentiment ruin you. Tell me, Elena, did you really think he cared about you? The man who ordered your father's death?" She stepped forward, anger flashing through her tears. "You set us up. You used both of us. You made us monsters to each other." He shrugged. "And you played your part beautifully." The words hit her harder than any bullet could. But before he could speak again, the boss raised his gun. "You took everything from her, from both of us." Morty smirked. "And yet here you are standing beside the man who pulled the trigger." That moment broke her. Every wound she'd hidden, every emotion she'd buried, came crashing to the surface. She turned to the boss, her voice trembling. "Is that true? Did you pull the trigger?" His silence was enough. She saw it in his eyes, the memory, the regret, the endless nights haunted by the sound of gunfire. Her world tilted again. The man she had come to love had indeed destroyed her past, even if he hadn't known the truth at the time. Tears filled her eyes. "You could have told me." "I wanted to," he said softly, his voice breaking. "But I didn't want to lose you before I could make it right." Morty's laughter echoed like a curse. Beautiful, tragic, predictable. He raised his weapon, aiming it at the boss. "Goodbye, children." The shot that followed came not from Morty, but from her. The sound tore through the air, and for a second, time froze. Morty fell, shock frozen on his face. The gun slipped from her trembling hands. She had done it, ended the man who had orchestrated her life's nightmare. But there was no satisfaction, only silence. The boss stepped forward, taking the gun from her shaking fingers, his expression unreadable. "It's over," he whispered. "No," she said, her voice hollow. "It's never over." He moved closer, reaching to touch her, but she stepped back. "You did what you thought was right," she said through tears, "and so did I. But right and wrong stopped mattering a long time ago." "Elena," she cut him off. "I don't hate you anymore, but I can't stay." Her voice cracked on the last word, because even as she said it, every part of her wanted to. He looked at her then, not as the boss, not as the man who once whispered, "Stay with me tonight," but as someone stripped bare, broken, human. His eyes told her everything he couldn't say. Don't go, but she had to. Staying would mean forgiving everything: the blood, the lies, the past. Leaving meant freedom, even if it tore her apart. She stepped into the night, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement like ghosts of memories. Behind her, he stood at the window, watching her fade into the rain. They were two souls who had finally understood each other too late, bound by love, divided by fate. And as she disappeared into the darkness, one truth echoed in her heart. She had come for revenge, but found redemption. She had planned to destroy him, but in the end, he was the one who taught her how to live again. The city never slept that night. Somewhere between love and destruction, two souls learned that revenge could burn everything, even the heart that carried it. She walked away with tears glistening like rain, her heart a battlefield of what was lost and what was found. He remained in the shadows, the mafia boss who had built an empire of sin, but lost the only thing pure he ever touched. His whisper still echoed in the wind, "Stay with me tonight." Not as a command, but as a plea that would never be answered. And though their paths had parted, their stories were forever intertwined, proof that even in darkness, love can be the cruelest weapon of all. Because in the end, she didn't stay for revenge. She stayed because somehow, against all odds, she fell in love with the monster who had become her salvation.